The Alpha King followed his maid, and what he found out made him fall in love with her. The kingdom was silent tonight, except for the faint whisper of the northern wind and the occasional crackle of torchlight flickering along the grand halls. Inside, the king's chambers were warm, yet Kael'thar felt a chill that no fire could chase away. He had ruled the kingdom for many years, a king both feared and respected. His presence alone could silence a hall, and his words could shape the fate of nations. Yet tonight, something disturbed him in a way that no sword or decree ever had. It was not a threat from another kingdom, nor a rebellion in the villages. It was something smaller, quieter, yet infinitely more potent. A young maid moving through the corridors with quiet purpose. Her name was Leora. Kael'thar had seen her before, countless times, yet she had always been just another servant in the palace, unremarkable, obedient, and unseen. But lately, something about her caught his attention. Perhaps it was the way she carried herself, as if the heavy air of the palace did not touch her. Perhaps it was the way her eyes seemed to hold a secret too deep to speak. He could not say for certain. All he knew was that he wanted to know more. The king rose from his chair and walked to the window, watching her reflection glide along the marble floors below. The hallways were long, winding like a labyrinth, and Leora moved through them with an ease that seemed almost otherworldly. Kael'thar's curiosity flared. No one ever moved so freely in the palace after curfew, and certainly no servant dared to venture into the old wings of the castle without permission. Without thinking, he followed. He descended the grand staircase in silence, the echo of his boots swallowed by the thick rugs and the whispering shadows. The corridors stretched ahead, dark and cold, yet lit by the occasional torch. Leora was ahead, her back straight, her steps deliberate. Kael'thar could feel the weight of the silence pressing against him, heavy and expectant, as if the castle itself was holding its breath. She stopped in front of a tall door he had never noticed before, carved with symbols that pulsed faintly with a strange, silver light. Leora's hand hovered over the handle, trembling slightly, though she made no sound. Kael'thar watched her, torn between the instinct to call out and the desire to see what she was hiding. Finally, she pushed the door open. Inside was a room unlike any other in the palace. The walls were lined with shelves of ancient books, scrolls, and jars of strange ingredients that seemed to shimmer in the torchlight. In the center of the room was a large mirror, framed with twisted silver that caught the light and reflected it in odd angles. Leora stepped closer to the mirror, her eyes fixed on its surface, her hands moving in delicate, precise gestures. Kael'thar's breath caught in his throat. He could not see what she was doing, but he felt it, a hum of magic, of power, of something forbidden. He should have turned back, should have left her to her secrets, yet he could not. Something about her drew him forward, stronger than caution, stronger than fear. Leora spoke softly, words that seemed to ripple in the air like wind through trees. Kael'thar leaned closer, trying to catch them, but the sound was like a distant melody, impossible to hold. Suddenly, the mirror flared with light, and for a brief moment, Kael'thar saw visions, flashes of a world he did not recognize. A dark forest, a crown dripping with frost, a young girl running from shadows that whispered her name. And then, just as quickly, it was gone. Leora sensed him then. Her head turned sharply, eyes wide, and for a moment, Kael'thar saw fear, raw and unguarded. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice trembling but firm. Kael'thar stepped into the room, the echo of his boots breaking the spell. "It is I," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "Why do you hide in this forbidden place?" Leora's hands fell to her sides. I have my reasons, Your Majesty," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She did not look at him, her gaze fixed on the mirror that now reflected only her face, pale and tense. Kael'thar studied her. She was young, perhaps no older than 18, yet there was a strength in her posture, a quiet defiance that intrigued him. "You are not just a maid, are you?" he asked, his tone softer now, curious rather than accusing. Leora's lips pressed together. She shook her head slightly. I do what I must, she said, her voice steadying. I serve, that is all. But Kael'thar did not believe her. He had seen too much, known too many lies, and something in her eyes told him the truth would not be given freely. Do you know the rules of this castle? He asked, stepping closer, his shadow falling over her. No servant may enter the old wings after dark. No servant may touch the mirror. And yet here you are. She finally looked at him then, and he caught a glimpse of something he had not expected, not fear, not defiance, but a quiet sorrow, a weight that seemed to press on her very soul. I cannot explain, she said. Kael'thar felt a strange pull in his chest. He was used to command, to control, to bend others to his will, but with her it was different. He did not want to command her. He wanted to understand her, and perhaps, if he was honest, he wanted to protect her. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. Finally Kael'thar spoke. Then show me, he said softly. Show me why you risk so much. Leora hesitated. Her eyes flicked to the shattered edges of the mirror, the shards reflecting faint streaks of silver light. Then slowly she lifted her hands again, and Kael'thar watched as she began to trace symbols in the air, her voice rising in a chant that was both strange and beautiful. The room seemed to respond to her words. The light shimmered, and the air grew thick with magic. Kael'thar felt it in his bones, an energy both dangerous and irresistible. He could feel his heart beating faster, a mixture of awe and fear. Then, suddenly, the mirror flared brightly and cracked down the center. Leora gasped, stumbling back, her hands shaking. Kael'thar reached for her instinctively. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice sharp with concern. "No," she said, shaking her head. But Kael'thar could see the truth in her eyes. The mirror had been more than glass, and whatever it held had now been disturbed. For a long moment they stood there, neither speaking, the silence heavy with tension. Then Kael'thar said quietly, "Tell me your name." "Leora," she whispered. Kael'thar nodded, as if that single word carried more weight than anything else in the world. "And I am Kael'thar," he said, "king of this realm, and yet I find myself more curious about you than about any matter of state." Leora's eyes widened slightly, but she did not speak. Her silence was not defiance this time. It was a quiet acknowledgement of the truth she could not yet say aloud. Kael'thar stepped closer, careful, measured. "I will not punish you," he said, "but you must tell me why you do this, why you risk so much." Leora's gaze fell to the floor. I have no choice," she said finally, her voice low, almost a whisper. "There are things that follow me, things that I cannot escape. I do this to protect others." Kael'thar's heart clenched. He was a king who had faced countless battles, but here, in this quiet room filled with magic and fear, he felt powerless. Not against armies, not against enemies, but against the pull he felt toward this girl, this servant who was anything but ordinary. For a moment they simply stood there, the world outside the room fading into silence. Then Leora turned toward the shattered mirror, her eyes distant. "You should not have seen this," she said softly. Kael'thar reached for her hand, stopping just short of touching her. "Perhaps," he said, his voice gentle, "or perhaps it is exactly what I needed, to see you not as a servant but as someone who carries her own weight in this world, someone extraordinary." Leora's lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, she lowered her gaze, the faintest blush coloring her cheeks. Kael'thar felt a warmth spread through him, a sensation he had not known in years. Protection, fascination, and something deeper, a longing that made his chest ache. The wind outside moaned through the palace corridors, carrying with it the scent of frost and distant forests. Kael'thar knew that the night was far from over, and that the mysteries of this room, this girl, and the magic she wielded were only beginning to reveal themselves. He stepped back, his gaze locked on her. "Rest now," he said softly. "We will speak more. There is much to uncover, Leora, and I will not leave you to face it alone." Leora's eyes flickered toward him, a mixture of fear and hope in their depths. I do not know if you should, she whispered. Kael'thar gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Perhaps not, but I cannot turn away, not now. And with that, the king left the room, the echoes of his footsteps fading into the marble halls, leaving Leora alone with the shards of the mirror and the lingering traces of magic. She sank to the floor, her hands trembling, her heart racing. She had hoped to keep her secret hidden, to bear her burden in silence. But now the Alpha King had seen, and she knew deep in her soul that nothing would ever be the same again. Outside, the wind howled, carrying the promise of storms yet to come. And somewhere deep within the castle, King Kael'thar's thoughts were filled not with conquest or command, but with a single name: Leora. The palace was quieter than usual the next morning, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the whispers of the previous night. King Kael'thar could not focus on his usual matters of state. His mind kept drifting to Leora, to her hands tracing the symbols in the air, to the way her eyes had reflected both sorrow and courage, and to the lingering echo of magic that seemed to cling to her like a shadow. He had commanded armies, negotiated peace treaties, and faced monsters in the dark forests beyond his kingdom. Yet none of these trials had left him feeling as powerless as he did when confronted with her. Leora was no ordinary girl, and that realization both troubled and fascinated him. Kael'thar's curiosity became an obsession. He needed to know more about her secret. He needed to understand the power she wielded and the dangers she had risked to hide it. But the girl, sensing his scrutiny, became more cautious, more distant. That only increased the king's determination. By evening, Kael'thar decided he could not wait any longer. If he wanted answers, he would follow her again. This time he would not simply observe, he would go where she went, even if it led him into the unknown. Leora moved silently through the palace halls, carrying a small bundle wrapped in dark cloth. Kael'thar watched her from the shadows, his footsteps muffled on the cold marble floor. She left the warmth of the main palace and stepped into the frostbitten courtyard, the moonlight glinting on the icy stones beneath her feet. Her breath rose in small clouds as she made her way toward the gates leading to the forest. The forest had always been forbidden to servants, and even many of Kael'thar's trusted knights avoided its winding paths. Legends told of spirits and creatures that preyed on the unwary, of time and reality bending among the trees. Yet Leora walked as though she belonged there, her movements careful but confident. Kael'thar followed, keeping his distance. His senses were alert, every instinct of a warrior on edge. The deeper they went, the thicker the mist became, curling around the trunks of ancient trees like living tendrils. Strange sounds echoed in the distance, whispers that could have been the wind or something far older. Leora finally stopped beside a pool of water, black as ink and perfectly still. She knelt and set her bundle on the ground. Carefully, she opened it to reveal a small, glowing crystal, pulsing with a light that seemed to respond to her presence. Kael'thar crouched behind a tree, straining to see without revealing himself. "This place, it listens," she whispered, almost to herself. "It knows who comes. It remembers those who are lost." Kael'thar felt a chill run down his spine. The forest did not merely surround them. It seemed alive, aware. He realized with unease that Leora was not just performing magic. She was communicating with something older than the castle itself, something that had watched over the kingdom long before he had been born. Leora's hands hovered above the crystal. She closed her eyes, her voice low and steady. "I seek protection not for myself, but for those who cannot defend themselves." Kael'thar's heart clenched. He had faced countless battles, yet he could feel the weight of her burden pressing against him, heavier than any armor, sharper than any sword. She was not asking for power or revenge. She was seeking a way to protect, to shield others from a fate they did not deserve. Suddenly, the crystal flared brightly, sending a ripple of light across the mist. Kael'thar saw visions again, flashes of Leora's past, memories she had long tried to hide. He saw her as a child, running through a village engulfed in shadows, chased by figures with glowing eyes. He saw her family taken by a curse, their lives twisted and stolen by dark forces. And he saw her, alone, carrying the weight of a prophecy she had never asked for. That one day, only the heart of the Alpha King could break the curse that bound her. Kael'thar's mind struggled to process what he had seen. The girl he had thought was a simple servant was the key to a magic older than his kingdom, a magic that could change the fate of all who lived there. His chest tightened. He could no longer see her as simply a servant, not after witnessing the depth of her suffering and the strength it had taken to survive. Suddenly, Leora's eyes snapped open and she froze. Kael'thar ducked behind a tree, holding his breath. He had been discovered. For a moment, panic flashed across her face, but then she squared her shoulders, determination shining in her gaze. "You are not supposed to be here," she said, her voice firm despite the fear in her eyes. "I could say the same to you," Kael'thar replied, stepping from the shadows. "Why are you here, risking yourself in this forest? Why do you carry this burden alone?" Leora's gaze fell to the crystal. "Because if I do not, no one else can," she said softly. "The curse, it follows me. It seeks to harm anyone I care for. I cannot let it touch others." Kael'thar took a cautious step forward. "Tell me what this curse is," he said, his tone gentle yet commanding. "Tell me and I will help you." Leora shook her head. "You do not understand," she whispered. "This is not a danger you can fight with swords or armies. This is older than your crown, older than the stones of this castle. Even your power, even your heart, may not be enough to stop it." Kael'thar's heart pounded. The girl was speaking of forces he had only heard of in legends, forces that could destroy entire kingdoms if left unchecked. Yet he felt an unshakable pull toward her, a desire to protect her, to stand beside her, even if it meant risking himself. "I will not leave you to face it alone," he said. "Whatever it is, we will confront it together." Leora looked at him, a mixture of fear, hope, and something deeper she could not yet name. "You do not know what you are saying," she whispered. "To help me to touch this curse will change you, forever. You may lose more than you can imagine." Kael'thar met her gaze steadily. "I have lost many things," he said quietly, "but I have never lost someone like you, not to fear, not to shadows, not to magic. I will face whatever comes as long as you are by my side." For a long moment the forest was silent. The only sound was the soft ripple of the pool and the wind moving through the ancient trees. Then, slowly, Leora nodded. "Very well," she said. "But you must promise me no rash moves, no fighting forces you do not understand. You must trust me." Kael'thar inclined his head. "I trust you," he said, though he knew the weight of that trust would be tested. Together they began the ritual. Leora's hands moved over the crystal, tracing patterns in the air that seemed to hum with energy. Kael'thar watched closely, trying to understand, to be ready if danger came. The forest seemed to respond to her presence, the mist swirling and pulsing with the rhythm of her magic. Suddenly the ground trembled. A shadow rose from the edge of the forest, dark and twisting, a shape that seemed to drink the light around it. Kael'thar stepped in front of Leora, his hand on the hilt of his sword. "Stay behind me," he commanded, his voice low and steady. The shadow paused as if sensing something, then moved forward. Leora's eyes glowed with a fierce light. "No," she said firmly. "You cannot stop this. Only together, only with your heart and my magic can it be contained." Kael'thar nodded. He felt fear, yes, but also a strange exhilaration. For the first time, he felt the depth of connection with another soul, the bond that comes from standing against the darkness together. The shadow surged, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. Leora's magic flared, wrapping around Kael'thar as if protecting him, and he felt the power of the curse itself brushing against him, testing his strength, his courage, his heart. Then, in a blinding flash, the shadow recoiled and vanished into the mist. The forest fell silent once more. Leora collapsed to her knees, exhausted but alive. Kael'thar knelt beside her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No," she said, though her chest rose and fell rapidly. "But it will return, stronger. It knows now that we have joined forces." Kael'thar helped her to her feet. "Then we will face it together. Whatever comes, we face it together." Leora looked at him, her eyes softening. "You truly mean that?" Kael'thar met her gaze, his expression unwavering. "I do," he said. "No magic, no curse, no shadow can keep me from standing with you." For the first time, a faint smile touched her lips. It was small, fleeting, but it held warmth, hope, and trust, a fragile light in the midst of darkness. But even as they turned to leave the forest, neither noticed the pair of glowing eyes watching them from the shadows, nor the whisper that trailed after them, carried on the wind. "The Alpha King has taken interest. The game has begun." Kael'thar's hand brushed lightly against Leora's as they walked back to the palace, and for the first time both of them felt the stirrings of something neither had expected, a bond, unspoken but powerful, forged in fear, courage, and a shared struggle against forces older than them both. And somewhere in the forest, the curse waited, patient and relentless, knowing that the next encounter would not be so easily survived. The palace was restless that night. Even the torches flickering along the hallways seemed uneasy, casting shadows that twisted and danced against the marble walls. King Kael'thar sat in his chambers, staring into the fire. The events in the forest weighed heavily on him. Leora's magic, the curse, and the shadowy threat had all left an imprint on his mind, one that would not fade with sleep. Yet it was not fear that kept him awake. It was thought of her, Leora. Her presence, her courage, her secret strength, all of it drew him like a tide he could not resist. He had faced countless battles, yet he felt powerless when it came to her. The next morning, the palace was in chaos. Word had arrived that a neighboring kingdom had mobilized its forces near the border. They had sensed the stirrings of Leora's curse and believed the Alpha King to be distracted. Kael'thar, though alarmed, did not panic. Armies could be commanded, borders defended, threats neutralized. But alongside these matters, his mind remained on Leora. He found her in the kitchens, quietly arranging herbs and ingredients with delicate precision. When she saw him, she froze. "Your Majesty," she whispered. I did not expect you so early." Kael'thar stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I did not come for ceremony," he said. "I came because we must prepare. The threat at the border may be tied to your curse. We cannot ignore it." Leora's eyes flickered with worry. "I fear it is more than just a border threat. Forces beyond our understanding are moving, drawn by the magic. We must be careful, Kael'thar." He placed a hand gently on hers. "Then we face it together. Whatever comes, we face it together." Her gaze lingered on his hand, then on his eyes. There was something in that look, a quiet vulnerability, a truth he had never shown to anyone. And in that moment, Leora understood that this king, this Alpha, was not just a ruler of armies and crowns. He was a man, capable of fear, courage, and even tenderness. As the day wore on, Kael'thar and Leora moved through the palace together, preparing wards, checking fortifications, and quietly training the guards in ways that might help them resist the shadowy forces. Leora's magic flowed through the halls like a subtle current, strengthening protections and offering glimpses into the future. The palace seemed to hum with power when she was near. Despite the tasks at hand, the two found moments of quiet connection. They would exchange small smiles across corridors, brief touches that lingered longer than they should, and shared words that hinted at trust, admiration, and something deeper, a bond forming in the crucible of danger. But danger came faster than expected. As night fell, the gates of the palace shook. Shadows moved in the courtyards, figures that were neither human nor entirely creature. Kael'thar drew his sword, the cold metal familiar and reassuring, yet it felt insufficient against the forces approaching. Leora stood beside him, her hands glowing with magic that pulsed like a heartbeat. "Stay close," she said, her voice firm. "These shadows will test us, Kael'thar. Together, we must be stronger than they expect." The attack came swiftly. Dark figures surged across the courtyard, their movements fluid and unnatural. The guards struggled to hold them back. Kael'thar fought with precision and strength, every swing of his sword cutting through the darkness, yet he could feel the shadows adapting, learning, and resisting. Leora's magic flared beside him, creating barriers of light that held the shadows at bay. She moved with a grace and determination that left Kael'thar in awe. Her power was not just formidable, it was purposeful, driven by something deeper than magic alone, a desire to protect, to shield, to survive. During a brief lull in the battle, Kael'thar saw a shadow creeping toward the inner palace. Without thinking, he lunged forward, but Leora's hand caught his arm. "Not alone," she whispered. "We do this together." They moved as one, their actions perfectly coordinated. Kael'thar's sword met the darkness, while Leora's magic restrained it. In those moments, he realized that their bond was more than survival. It was trust, unspoken, yet absolute. And with every shared glance, every brush of hands, he felt the stirrings of something deeper: admiration, longing, and an emotion he had long thought buried under duty and crown. After what felt like hours, the shadows finally recoiled, retreating into the night. The courtyard was littered with the remnants of the attack, but the palace stood. Kael'thar sheathed his sword, his chest heaving. He turned to Leora, searching for any sign of injury, only to find her pale but unbroken. "You were incredible," he said, his voice low and raw. I don't know if I have ever seen anything like it." She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight and something else, a faint blush, a warmth that mirrored his own feelings. "We did it together," she said softly. "It was not just my magic." Kael'thar took a step closer. "And yet, it is impossible not to admire you. Your courage, your strength, it surpasses anything I have known." Her gaze faltered, and for a moment the air between them was thick with unspoken words. Then, as if drawn by an invisible current, Kael'thar reached out and lightly brushed her cheek with the back of his hand. Leora's breath caught, and she lowered her eyes, unable to meet his. They had survived the attack, but neither could ignore the intensity of their connection. Danger had brought them together, but it was their shared courage and vulnerability that had forged something far stronger, a bond that neither could deny. Yet the night was not over. From the shadows, a figure watched, tall, cloaked, and silent. Its eyes glowed with a pale light, and it whispered words that seemed to pierce the very air. "The Alpha King trusts too easily, and the maid holds the key to everything." Kael'thar and Leora did not notice the watcher, but its presence hung over them like a promise of trials yet to come. The following days were filled with preparation. Leora worked tirelessly, strengthening the palace's wards and consulting with Kael'thar on strategy. He, in turn, ensured the kingdom's defenses were ready, training guards to recognize not just physical threats, but magical ones as well. Despite the tension, small moments of intimacy blossomed. In the library, Kael'thar found Leora poring over ancient texts, searching for clues about the curse. He knelt beside her, studying the runes she traced with delicate fingers. "You know so much," he said quietly. I feel as though I have only begun to understand you, and yet I cannot stop thinking about you." Leora glanced at him, her cheeks flushed. You are a king," she said softly. "I am just a servant. You have duties, responsibilities. I cannot ask you to care for me like this." Kael'thar smiled, a small, genuine smile that rarely touched his face. "Perhaps not," he said, "but I do care, Leora, more than I ever thought possible. And I will not turn away, even if it complicates everything." Her eyes met his, and in that instant the walls between them seemed to fade. There was no master or servant, no crown or spell, only two souls, bound by circumstance, courage, and an undeniable connection. But even as they shared that quiet moment, a messenger arrived from the northern border. The attack there had intensified, and reports hinted that the enemy was using dark magic, likely connected to Leora's curse. Kael'thar's brow furrowed. The danger was growing, and it would not wait for hesitation or fear. He stood and extended his hand to Leora. "We must go," he said. "This is no longer a threat we can face from the palace. We must act together and end it before it spreads further." Leora nodded, her resolve hardening. "I am ready," she said. "But Kael'thar, you must trust me completely. The magic we face is older than any sword, older than armies. It will test us in ways we cannot foresee." "I trust you," Kael'thar said, gripping her hand firmly. "Whatever comes, we face it together." As they rode north under the pale light of the moon, the wind biting at their faces, the shadows seemed to stretch behind them, reaching toward the palace as if aware of their absence. Somewhere deep in the forests they had left behind, the cloaked figure watched their departure, and its whisper followed them. "Soon, the bond will be tested. The Alpha King's heart will be tempted, and the maid's secret will reveal itself in full." Kael'thar's grip on Leora's hand tightened. He did not know what awaited them, only that he would not let her face it alone. And Leora, for the first time in many years, felt a glimmer of hope, not for the curse to end, but for the possibility that together they could endure anything. As the night deepened and the northern forests loomed ahead, neither of them noticed the first signs of the enemy's dark magic spreading across the land. The storm was coming, and it would not wait. But for now, in the quiet moments between danger and fear, their hearts were bound by courage, trust, and a burgeoning love neither could deny. And somewhere in the shadows, the curse waited, patient and relentless, knowing that the next confrontation would test not just their strength, but the depth of their bond, a bond that might prove to be the only thing capable of standing against the darkness. The northern forests stretched endlessly before them, dark and foreboding. The wind whistled through the twisted branches, carrying whispers that made the hair on Kael'thar's neck rise. Leora rode beside him, her hands tightly gripping the reins of her horse, her eyes scanning the shadows as if she could see the magic that lurked there. The journey had been long and perilous. Each step forward felt heavier than the last, weighed down by the knowledge of what awaited them. Reports from the scouts had grown grimmer by the hour, villages abandoned, crops withered, animals fleeing in terror. Wherever the curse moved, it left a shadow that could not be ignored. Kael'thar's sword rested across his lap, yet he felt powerless in a way he had never known. Armies, weapons, and strategy could not confront the dark magic they faced. Only Leora's power, combined with his courage and leadership, could hope to challenge it, and even that was uncertain. "Kael'thar," Leora said softly, breaking the tense silence, "we are close. I can feel it. The source of the darkness, it waits for us." Kael'thar glanced at her. "Are you sure we can face it?" His voice was calm, but beneath it lay the unspoken fear he had refused to admit. "This, whatever it is, it has been growing for centuries. Even you may not control it alone." Leora shook her head. "Not alone," she said firmly. "But with you, yes, together, we can confront it. I trust you, Kael'thar. Will you trust me?" He met her gaze, the intensity in her eyes leaving no room for doubt. "I trust you," he said quietly. "Completely." The forest opened into a clearing, bathed in the cold light of a crescent moon. In its center stood a stone altar, etched with runes that glowed faintly in silver. Shadows writhed around it, dark and twisting, as if the night itself had taken form. Kael'thar dismounted, drawing his sword, while Leora stepped forward, her hands glowing with the soft light of her magic. "This is it," she whispered. "The heart of the curse. Whatever waits, we face it together." From the shadows emerged a figure taller than any human, cloaked in darkness that seemed to absorb the light. Its eyes were pale, glowing like shards of ice. Kael'thar's chest tightened as he took a defensive stance, sensing the immense power emanating from the figure. "You dare approach me," the shadow hissed, voice echoing with 1,000 whispers. The Alpha King and the maid, foolish mortals, you cannot hope to end what has existed since before your kingdom was born. Kael'thar stepped forward, his sword steady. We will try, he said, because we face it together, and because I will not allow you to harm anyone else. The shadow laughed, a sound like cracking ice and distant thunder. It surged forward and the forest trembled. Kael'thar met its attack with his sword, but each strike seemed to pass through it, leaving him frustrated and breathless. Leora stepped forward, chanting words of protection and binding. Her magic glowed brighter, intertwining with Kael'thar's presence, strengthening him, giving him focus. The shadow recoiled for a moment, taken aback by the combined force of courage and magic. Then it lunged again, faster than before, its movements almost impossible to track. Kael'thar and Leora moved as one, instinct and trust guiding their actions. Every swing of the sword, every pulse of magic was in perfect harmony. Kael'thar felt something shift inside him, a strength not of muscle but of heart. Leora's courage, her unwavering resolve, and her willingness to fight beside him unlocked a part of him he had long kept buried. Vulnerability mixed with love, fear transformed into determination. The battle raged for hours. Shadows multiplied, twisting and surging from the altar, each more ferocious than the last. Leora's hands glowed until the light became almost blinding, her voice rising in a chant that seemed to bind the darkness itself. Kael'thar fought tirelessly, striking with precision and defending her whenever the shadows broke through her protective barrier. At one point, a massive shadow surged toward Leora, faster than the eye could follow. Kael'thar threw himself in front of her, blocking the attack with his sword, but the force knocked him to the ground. Leora rushed forward, her hands blazing with magic, wrapping the shadow in light until it dissolved into mist. Kael'thar looked at her breathless and saw the fire in her eyes, fierce, unwavering, and full of life. "You saved me," he said, his voice rough but sincere. "No," she said softly. "We save each other. That is how this ends together." The altar trembled, the runes glowing brighter than ever. Leora stepped closer to it, her magic flowing into the stone. Kael'thar watched, knowing the risk she was taking. If she overexerted herself, if the magic consumed her, he might lose her forever. But he also knew that this was the moment they had both been preparing for. "Kael'thar," she whispered, her eyes meeting his. "I can break the curse, but only if you give me something in return. A part of your power, a piece of your alpha strength. It will weaken you, but it is the only way." He felt the weight of her words. Sacrifice was nothing new to him. He had given everything to protect his kingdom. But this was different. It was personal. It was intimate. Yet looking at her, seeing her courage and trust, he knew there was no hesitation. "I give it," he said firmly. "Whatever it takes for you, for us, for the kingdom, I will not turn away." Leora nodded, her hands glowing brighter than ever. She reached out and touched his chest, feeling the energy of his life, his strength, his essence. Slowly, painfully, the magic began to flow from him into the altar, combining with hers. The shadows writhed and screamed, but gradually, they weakened, dissolving into mist that vanished into the night. Kael'thar fell to his knees, breath ragged, feeling the loss of some of his strength but also a strange lightness he had never known. Leora fell beside him, exhausted but alive, her hands trembling but the curse broken. They stayed there for a long moment, silent, hearts pounding, the first signs of dawn breaking across the horizon. The sky was tinged with pink and gold, light spilling over the dark forest. The world felt new, as if the night itself had been cleansed. Kael'thar reached for her hand, holding it gently. "You did it," he said, his voice full of awe and relief. "You broke the curse." "No," she said softly, a faint smile on her lips. "We did it together." For a long while, they simply held hands, the exhaustion of battle giving way to a quiet, profound peace. Kael'thar realized something he had never allowed himself to feel before. Love, not for duty or obligation, but for a person whose courage and heart had changed him completely. "You are extraordinary," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I have fought many battles, faced countless enemies, yet none have moved me like you have." Leora's eyes met his, and for the first time she allowed herself to hope. "And you," she said softly, "have shown me that even a king can have a heart capable of courage beyond the sword. You have fought not for power, but for me." Kael'thar smiled, a rare, gentle expression. "And I would do it again every time if it meant standing with you." The wind carried the scent of frost and new beginnings. Birds stirred in the trees, their songs greeting the first light. The shadows had fled, the curse was broken, and yet the world still held challenges. But Kael'thar and Leora knew one thing: whatever came next, they would face it together. As they rode back toward the palace, side by side, Kael'thar felt a shift within himself. He was still king, still alpha, but something had changed. His power was no longer the only measure of his strength. Love, trust, and courage, these were equally powerful, and they had been forged in the fires of shadow and danger. When they reached the palace gates, the guards bowed, astonished at the sight of their king, and the young maid who had stood beside him through unimaginable peril. Kael'thar dismounted and offered Leora his hand. She took it, and together they walked through the grand halls, the weight of past fears lifting with every step. In the throne room, Kael'thar stood before his people, his crown gleaming in the morning light. "The curse is ended," he announced. "Our kingdom is safe. But more importantly, we have learned that strength lies not in fear or dominion, but in courage, trust, and the bonds we form with those we love." Leora stood beside him, a quiet smile on her face. The court whispered in awe and admiration, but the two of them only had eyes for each other. In the midst of triumph, they had discovered something far greater, a connection that no shadow, no curse, and no power could ever break. Kael'thar reached for her hand, holding it firmly. "We are stronger together," he said softly, "and I will not let anything come between us again." Leora squeezed his hand gently. "Nor I," she said. "Whatever the future holds, we face it side by side." And as the sun rose over the frost-kissed kingdom, golden light spilling across the marble walls of the palace, the Alpha King and his maid walked forward, not as master and servant, but as equals bound by trust, courage, and a love that had grown stronger in the heart of darkness. The curse had been broken, shadows had fled, and in the light of a new day, Kael'thar and Leora knew their hearts were free, not just from fear, but from the doubts that had haunted them. Their journey was far from over, yet they had discovered the most powerful force of all: the bond of two souls, forged in fire and shadow, unbroken and unyielding. The kingdom would remember that day not only as the end of a curse, but as the beginning of a story of courage, love, and redemption, written in the hearts of an Alpha King and a maid who had dared to face the darkness together.